Cayin's new flagship N8 Mark II music player not only has a full Android system on it, but dual Korg Nutubes in a balanced configuration. Let's check it out. So Cayin's N8 Mark II with dual Korg Nutubes. Now, when the first N8 came out, it surprised everyone because Cayin had managed to put a Korg Nutube inside a portable player. It's not quite so much of a shock because the Korg Nutube is a modern version of a kind of old school vacuum tube. And being modern, it doesn't have the same kind of power requirements. Like old tubes require a heater, and that has to heat up the tube and they get warm. And so full-size tubes aren't going to work in something that's portable. For portable gear, which had tubes like this N3 Pro, that used the old style hearing aid tubes, which are smaller, and you can just, if it was lit up, you'd see it in this window. But they still require some degree of current and voltage in there. And of course, they're not made anymore. You're basically using new old stock tubes to make that kind of thing. And of course, there'll be a limited supply, and of course, they're matching them. They won't be so accurate. The Korg Nutube is a much more modern take on a vacuum tube, and it allows more possibilities. So for example, Korg have a portable amp available, which uses it, and you just put inside a regular battery, and it'll work as an amp quite readily. It doesn't require much power at all. The problem is it's still fairly physically large. I mean, they're putting two in here. They ended up fitting them in the side, and if you've probably already seen the pictures, you'll already be aware of this, because sticking, the tubes in there and sticking the battery in there and the large screen, well, that was a challenge. And in the original N8, of course, you only had a small screen, only had a limited music player in there, so you could only play back stuff off a micro SD card. Now we have full Android in here, and that allows you can put on whatever players you like, and I've already put on Apple Music and what have you, which I'll talk about in just a second when I get into the software. But in physical terms, it's still going to be quite large. And then while we have our usual ports out here, balanced output, we have regular 3.5, and we have a line out, and USB-C, and an I2S, which I'll talk about more when I go into the details of what it can do. It's still a large chunky player. I mean, if you look at this M11 Plus, you'll see that if I can hold them side by side, and there's a reason I'm kind of being ginger with this, is I don't currently have a screen protector for this, as they haven't yet been produced. So this thing picks up fingerprints like nobody's business. You'll see that this M11 Plus is considerably smaller, and if I just do it without getting fingerprints over everything, considerably thinner. So the only thing that's kind of really exceeds the excess of this, although it's not as blingy as the original, is the M17, which is just truly in the crazy level of being, massively large, considerably larger. It's basically a desktop player. So it's gigantic. Like, it's the size of my iPhone 12 Pro Max, but multiply that by about 3 and stack them together, and you've got the M17, more or less. So, but still, it's a very chunky and heavy player. But at least they've kind of dialed down the bling of the original, and it doesn't look quite so like, Chinese overkill bling, although, if you want to kind of flex with this, you're going to have to show the volume knob to everyone, or probably the fancy case. Now, the other thing that's not here yet is that Cayin will have a case that's much like this one for the N3 Pro and other players, but it's not being produced as was the screen protector, so I couldn't show that in the video as yet, but you'll see that when I do my review and write it up on here.audio, and I'll add that later in as they arrive. Now, since you probably want to see the tubes in action before anything else, let me just quickly plug in something that will cause them to activate, because to preserve the tube life, the tubes will be deactivated if it's not in tube mode or there's new music playing. It will cut off. So if we start this playing now and I turn this on its side, you'll be able to see the Korg Nutubes have lit up there. So that's, as about as exciting as it gets. So you can certainly flex off your tubes to everyone. If I pause the music now, what will happen is after a few seconds, the tubes will cut out. And again, that's preserving them, because even modern, tubes, you don't want to use them excessively or leave them on all the time, as eventually they'll burn out, and that will, shorten the life of this device. But you should generally, I don't know how long or how many years or how many hours worth of playing you get out of there, but it should be, into the thousands easily. So you should have plenty of time to use this before the tubes burn out. But there is a lot of effort put into preserving the tubes in this, which is kind of critical. So anyway, but speaking of that, let's take a look at the user interface and have a look at what this thing can do. And if you're wondering why I've got it sitting on this mat, it's to get the camera to stop whiting out everything that's white, basically, because everything around here is black pretty much. Now, the Android in here is Android 9, and the reason for that is it's using a system from hobbies Music that allows bit-perfect output from all applications. So, for example, if I have a variety that I've installed, Onkyo, HF Player, Rune, we have Apple Music and Qobuz on here, and having that available means that you will get bit-perfect output whatever software you want to use. That setup is not currently available for Android 10. However, you don't really need Android 10 for something like this. It's a music player. If you want something that does everything a smartphone does, well, you should use a smartphone, really. So the extra features, I've seen in Android 10, and I have an Android 10 player here, which is the M11 Plus. I never found any benefit to the extra features there. So that's something to consider. It still will use all the software you're generally going to use for music playback, or even have YouTube and that kind of thing, because there is, screen rotation and all that available. But kind of the primary stuff we want to look at is the settings that are in here. Now, the primary player is going to be hobbies Music Player, and it was front and center when I got this. Now, there is a Cayin player, which was kind of front and center in previous Cayin dApps, and that's a kind of cut down version of the hobbies Music Player with all the main features, just not the hobbies Music login thing, which I've never used. So I'm not sure which is going to end up front and center, but the impression so far is it's going to be hobbies Music. Now, if you want to try the hobbies Music Player to see if you like it or not, or detest it immensely, you can actually download it on iOS and Android anyway and try it out. I think there may only be minor differences between the regular available versions and the one installed on here. The main things we want to look at are in the settings. So just to start with, this is an initial production player, so it may be different to the ones that go into commercial production. Or if, for example, if you're watching this video a long time after I've made it, probably there'll have been a system upgrade of some kind, and some of the settings may have changed, and some of the features may have been altered slightly, or bugs have been fixed and that kind of thing. So this is about the device. It has, of course, the dual Korg Nutubes in there, and the dual ROHM DACs. And of course it has a Snapdragon 660 like all the other players I have floating around here, and which it has the same kind of performance. So generally kind of smartphone level performance, but it's not going to be as fast as the latest smartphones, obviously. You're going to be seeing a lot of players with the Snapdragon 660, I think, for quite a while. And of course we have version 1.0 of the software. Now, the next thing we want to look at are the audio settings, which are kind of critical. Now, most of them are fairly familiar to most people. One of the, of course, common ones is the anti-aliasing filter setting, or basically the digital filter. Now, there are only two in this, which is kind of boring compared to something like an ESS DAC or an AKM DAC, but there's a sharp roll-off and the default slow roll-off filter, which is what it came with. And some people notice a difference between these and some people don't. It's one of those things, try it and see if you notice a difference. If not, don't worry. We have DSD filter settings, and I'm not sure if this is the cutoff level or how much filtering is done. Now, the manual for this hasn't yet been produced as of making this video, so I'm not 100% sure about absolutely everything in this player. This is how early production this is. So you should set the DSD filter to cut off as much high frequency noise as possible, as DSD basically in the inaudible range is mostly noise. And now the next thing we want to look at is an interesting one, the digital output. Now that we have two here, we have I2S and SPDIF. Now we saw that there's an I2S port on there, which I still have the plug-in, but SPDIF, where's that? Well, if you're not familiar with hobbies players or Cayin players, you will not be aware that actually the USB-C port, what they do is they use the unused pins in the USB-C specification as SPDIF outputs. And there's a special cable you can get which goes USB to RCA to allow for SPDIF output. And as for example, a normal SPDIF port and most things looks like this RCA port that's on this M17. Now, I could actually connect up this using that cable to the M17 and use it as a digital source for this if I so desired. So that is available for people who want to do that. And of course, people will make custom cables all over the place that will do that kind of thing too. I mean, other than long ones, there are probably someone out there who makes short ones if you do want to use this as a digital transport to something else. But it could be kind of handy if you want to plug it into both of these into a high-end hi-fi system. But if you're not familiar with I2S, don't worry about it too much. It's one of those audio rabbit hole type things that, yeah, people who are really hardcore into their system know about. The line out setting, whether it's low, medium, or high, as well. So we can actually, if you have some device that doesn't like a high output from its source, if you're using this as a line out rather than a headphone amplifier, then you can actually adjust that. And of course, gain is the same, low, medium, or high for the headphone output. DSD gain compensation, for the people unfamiliar with DSD getting anywhere near full volume or clipping, basically minus 0 dB, is a very, very bad thing. So DSD is recorded with a compensation of minus 3 to 6 dB to stop anything coming anywhere near clipping. And so when you play it back to get a similar kind of volume level, there's a compensation thing built in. And of course you have channel balance and max volume if you want to adjust those. A useful thing that's in here is the connected devices. If you go into default USB configuration, the USB, of course, can be input or output, but you can also set the input to be file transfer, audio, regular audio in with USB power, like if you want it to charge the device at the same time, or if you don't want it to charge the N8 Mark II, whether that be for, just if you're plugging in a phone as a source, with an OTG cable, or you just don't want any potential extra noise generated by the charging circuit, then you can have audio in with no USB power, or no data transfer at all. And I just use it with a iFi Zen stream and have it charge, and that's what I've been doing for my listening lately. So that's that. Other than that, you have the usual lock screen button settings. Now, if the lock screen is on and not anything else, do you want the volume control, not volume buttons, I should say, which is the Android term, or the play, previous, and next buttons active when the lock screen is there? Say if you're going to stick it in some kind of pocket or whatever, or bag, and you don't want it to activate by accident. Those options are there. Otherwise, the rest is a standard Android 9 as far as I'm aware. Probably most of the interesting stuff happens from the pull-down screen at the top, which has the main settings available. Now, the balanced output, which is listed as BAL, can either be PO, which is headphone output, or LO, which is line output. Now, long answer short, a headphone amplifier has two gain stages, usually one for voltage and one for current. For line out, you don't need a current gain stage, you only need voltage gain. So usually a dedicated line out will only have that one gain stage, which supposedly is supposed to be better. Whether or not it will be on a portable system is kind of debatable, but generally you can switch it to the balanced output to be a dedicated line out if you want to use this as a DAC to, say, a regular headphone amp, especially all those people, for example, who are fanatical C9 users. But I have it in PO out there, so PO is phone out. Now we have our 3 gain settings, which we've already seen, and that covered very nicely, in-ear monitors through to full-size headphones, which I will talk about in the sound. The other 3 settings are where things get a little bit interesting. Now, we've already seen this in I think it was the E01 module and the Cayin C9 Class A or Class AB operation. For the uninitiated, Class A means that 100% of the power is available in the amplification circuit 100% of the time, regardless of whether music is playing or not. Class AB, that goes down to 50%, so you get a power saving, but some people think that Class A is technically better. And that's kind of a really debatable thing, as it's a complex issue depending on how the amplifier is designed. You have what some people have been calling Class A amps, which are really Class AB, because after they get to a certain power level, they slide out of Class A into Class AB. You see, it gets complicated, but we have those options there, and I'll talk about my impressions of those in the sound again. We have the usual selection whether you want solid state mode or tube mode. Now, if you're playing back music in solid state mode and you hit tube mode, you'll get a thing that will pop up for 5 seconds saying warming up the tubes, and after that 5 seconds, then the tubes will engage, and the whole time music will continue playing, so there'll be no interruption. So for those people who want to AB, who don't want that delay, you can do it readily from this. It's a really nicely implemented system, and it was the same on things like this N3 Pro. Now, the power mode, you can double the power output by selecting P plus mode, but it will only engage in Class AB mode. So you can get double the power output, but you don't get Class A mode. And I'm not sure if this is because the device just didn't have, drained the battery too fast or overheated, or what the exact reason was, but Power Plus mode literally doubles the power output, and you only get it available in Class AB mode. Now, actually, I suggested to Cayin that they combine these two and simply have P plus mode and Class AB mode as one setting, and then P mode and Class A mode as the second setting. But maybe, someone may want to put it in Class AB mode to save on battery life. It does have a very large battery in here, but all the same, it almost makes more sense to have double the power and just to automatically switch it into Class AB. But you have those options available, and obviously battery life will, suffer the most if you have tubes on here and Power Plus mode and that kind of thing. But we'll talk about that more in the sound impressions. So after the break, my impressions of how it sounded. As I usually do, I used the N8 Mark II with a variety of in-ear monitors and full-sized headphones, including these Dan Clark Audio Stealths, which I have in for review as well. Some interesting ones that have come up actually are these Audio Dream flagship in-ear monitors. They're from Brazil, and one of my patrons actually is the manufacturer of these in-ear monitors and sent me them for review, so that was pretty cool too. They have a bunch of Sonium EST drivers in there and actually pretty hard to drive, and I forgot to ask for a 4.4mm connector, so they became one of the primary ways I tested the 3.5mm output. My general impression of the R8 Mark II was that it had a fairly kind of meaty sound with maybe subtle changes depending on whether tube mode is engaged or not. Now the Korg Nutubes, as with the C9 amplifier, give a slightly more kind of musical sound. It sounds a little bit more spread out and, sounds slightly, wider and maybe a little bit more characterful. Now without the tubes, the sound is of course a bit sharper and more even, much as it is in something like the C9, but also likewise disengaging, say, the plus P mode, which I used a lot while the stealths were plugged in, they seem to weaken the bass a little, giving the feel of a slightly more kind of airy sound. Now, most interestingly, I couldn't discern a large difference at all between Class A and Class AB modes. Actually, I even doubted that I could hear any difference at all, and this was whether I was using in-ear monitors or full-sized headphones. The plus P mode, I think, had the most effect because the power mode made everything sound, especially with really demanding in-ear monitors such as these Audio Dream ones, made everything sound kind of the treble a little bit more expanded and the bass more full. It sounded like a bigger sound overall, where with the power plus mode disengaged, the sound became a little bit smaller in a sense. This was even true with the 3.5mm output. I was pretty impressed with that, especially with these demanding in-ear monitors, but at the same time it worked very well with the very non-demanding but extremely sensitive ARA IEMs, which I could easily put the player into low gain mode and still get really good performance out of there without any kind of excess hiss or noise or anything like that. That worked exceptionally well. So at least by itself, it has a really nice punchy and warm sound. I mean, if you're familiar with Cayin, you can sort of imagine that they took the N6 Mark II and combined it with a C9, and you more or less have an N8 Mark II. After some thinking about the kind of character of the DAC portion, and albeit that it is a complex thing to kind of evaluate, given that is the first time I've heard something with an ROHM DAC, in solid state mode, it doesn't have that edginess of, say, the ESS Tech DACs, which maybe the only thing I haven't had that edginess in has been pretty much the M17, but it doesn't have the kind of glass-like smoothness of the AKM, flagship DACs like the 4497 and 4499, which I find a little bit too smooth. I actually liked the sound overall. It wasn't kind of super, open and clear, but it wasn't so, maybe because of the tuning, and this is how Cayin likes things, but it didn't have any kind of excessive kind of what I call digital sound or any kind of harshness. I actually liked the overall presentation in general, but that presentation, it's like, how would that compare, considering that this is going to be a $3,500 product? How does it compare to other stuff? And that's where things got, well, as interesting. So I don't have any Astel and Kern players here, which I would have loved to compare with, because now that, or an iBass, so that would have been interesting as well. But I could compare it, of course, to the M17, and it's going to be a step, well, and really a step above an M11 Plus. I could say it's probably easiest to say in the player world, once you get above $1,000, above your kind of M11 level, that you do get decent driving power with full-sized headphones, and that was readily apparent with the Stealths. The only, of course, limitation that you have here is that I could easily hit maximum volume with these. These are only demanding headphones as things go, and with maybe quieter music, say some Dire Straits or classical music, it actually may be not loud enough for some people. So that's one of the limitations compared to something like the M17, which has a lot of headphone driving power, and it can be plugged into power to boost its output power even further, making it basically a kind of desktop player. Now, arguably the king of portable audio that exists is, of course, Chord's Hugo 2, and of course the 2 go attached there, and that's the same kind of price as a Cayin N8 Mark II. And, well, yeah, it's kind of the laws of physics apply here. You just can't compete with the insane computing power in here, the full-sized headphone driving ability that will power even very sensitive speakers. It has a real kind of purity of design that you just is, exceeds everything else. And it's a direct contrast to something like an N8 Mark II, in that this is designed to kind of be musical and warm and engaging, and this is designed to be as pure and accurate as possible. Now, of course, the Hugo 2 and 2Go combination gave more space to the sound, more detail, and kind of rather like how the Hugo TT2, which you may have seen on my desk in other videos, does in comparison to the Hugo 2. So it was that kind of step up. For example, one of my favorite tracks is from Dire Straits. It's Follow Me Home from their Communique album. And at the beginning of the track, you hear some waves, in the ocean. And, the nuances of the waves at the opening of that track were readily more apparent from the Hugo 2, especially with the stealths, which, of course, require more driving power. So the sound seemed to be more kind of spreading around my head with the stealths and the Hugo 2 versus the N8 Mark II, which is kind of more closed in, a more kind of one solid image in that sense. And also the Hugo 2, I think, being that it's designed to bring the music through as accurately as possible, does bring out more feeling in me when I listen through the Hugo 2 2Go combination. But however, the Hugo 2 2Go combination does require a smartphone or some other device to use. It can't really be used on its own if you want to play back music. You do require something else. And that's where the N8 Mark II has its advantage, is that it's a complete system there where you put your music in or stream music, and you don't need something external to do that like you do with the Hugo 2. But in that sense, sometimes I prefer, interestingly, the sound of the Hugo 2 to the TT2 combination. I like the more kind of solid sound that comes out of this versus the higher end gear. And this is kind of being a kind of equal step down. I do like the kind of solid sound out of the N8 Mark II, especially if I'm not listening. Not all the music I listen to is super detailed or super high end. And kind of as general listening, the N8 Mark II tended to make everything sound good, rather than kind of drill into the super fine details of the recording. Now, FiiO's M17, not entirely unlike Chord, aims for technical and technical fidelity as a primary goal, and has THX amps in here. It's designed to be kind of, aims for that measurement accuracy overall. Interestingly, it's, and I'll talk about this in its own review, it doesn't really sound like a ESS-based DAC at all. It actually has kind of a very open and clear sound. And I would have, if I hadn't known, I would have guessed that it had AKM DACs in there due to its kind of smoothness that it does have. Now, of course, rather than the meaty sound of the N8, the M17 is, well, smoother and more even sounding, rather like what you get from, say, a topping D90 DAC hooked up to, say, a THX amp. Now, it has the added advantage of desktop mode, which you can engage with a switch once it's plugged in via the with the extra power plugged in, which gives you a considerable power boost, and it gives you enough power for full-sized headphones like these stealths, and you can get much greater amount of volume out of it. And that high power mode is something that the N8 Mark II just can't really compete with in that sense. But in terms of portability, well, it is massive, equivalent to like my iPhone 12 Pro Max, which I'm recording this video with, but 3 of them, it's about the thickness of 3 of them, and with a weight to match. It is definitely not something you can stick in your pocket, even if you consider the N8 Mark II as kind of getting up there in terms of weight and whether it's kind of pocketable. The M17 really takes that to another level, and it actually comes with a desktop stand which has a cooling fan incorporated, because if you don't engage that, sometimes it can get really hot. So it's kind of, these two are like two sides of the same coin. You have your warm, kind of engaging, pleasant sound here, and you have your super clean and clear sound from the M17 Plus. But of course, this is desktop, and this is, well, really realistically desktop or transportable. The N8 Mark II, of course, is portable and has the flexibility of not requiring an extra power supply to actually get full power out of it. So I think overall, people who like the Cayin sound will really love the N8 Mark II. As far as portable players go, the N8 Mark II certainly ticks all the boxes as a flagship player. It's still pretty incredible that they managed to fit 2 Korg Nutubes in there and give something that can do quite a decent job with full-sized headphones. Like other Cayin gear, it has that characteristic of just simply making the music sound good, pleasant, and very easy to listen with, whether you're using in-ear monitors, which are very sensitive, difficult to drive in-ear monitors, or even full-sized headphones. I found it pretty satisfactory with all of those, although occasionally I did wish for a little bit more volume. As always, I'd like to thank my patrons for supporting this video. Without their help, I wouldn't be able to make these videos or do these reviews. including Audio Dream for setting over these beautiful in-ear monitors, which are actually very challenging to drive. Also thanks to Andy, who is working on behalf of Cayin, who sent over this player for me to review. As always, if you'd like my buying advice or help setting up your audio system, do consider supporting me. In exchange, I'll happily help you out, and you can join our little private community of enthusiasts. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out the review on here.audio, and I'll look forward to seeing you online.